Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wine.com Experiences. I'm Gwendolyn Osborn. Today, we are so excited you're here with us. We will be celebrating 100 years in wine for the Mondavi family by tasting the 2019 vintage of Continuum. So the Continuum is the one wine that we will be tasting today. So if you purchased it ahead of time from Wine.com, wonderful. Please make sure it's open, get it into a glass. If you don't have the wine, totally fine. This wine is still available on Wine.com, and you can buy it in standard bottle. You can buy it in a half bottle. And if you're feeling very adventurous, you can even find it in the Magnum. We are excited to be talking to three members of the Mondavi family to talk about their family and to talk about this wine and their journey over the past 100 years to share their story. So let's welcome Tim Mondavi, who is third generation wine grower, Carissa Mondavi and Brian Mondavi Borger, both fourth generation wine growers, and all Mondavis. So hello. Welcome to you. So excited you are here to talk to us today.
We're delighted to be here with you, Gwendolyn, and very much looking forward to sharing our story and getting to know your the people that are working with you these days.
Yeah, exactly. And I will take any day to taste this wine. So I'm in always. So we're celebrating 100 years of the Mondavi family wine growing with the 2019 vintage of Continuum. So let's talk a little bit about Continuum first. And for those of you at home, we will be talking and storytelling a little bit. So feel free to start swirling and sipping your wine if you'd like. I'm sure I will be tempted to do that as well. So Tim, let's talk a little bit about the aspiration behind Continuum and that vision.
Well, I grew up at Charles Krug Winery. It was established in Napa Valley in 1861, but my family has owned it since 1943. But I always heard my father speaking in fabulous terms about the great wines of the world. And so we, from a very young age, it was always the aspiration. When he left Charles Krug to start Robert Mondavi Winery, the intensity of that grew, the clarity of the focus grew, and so we carried on with that. And then when everything went up in smoke for us yet again at Robert Mondavi Winery, the times had changed, the market had changed, our understanding had changed. And so we elevated yet again our aspirations to focus on one wine from an outstanding site. So our goal is to have Continuum be recognized in the world as being among the very best. So Grand Cru on top of the world, that's where we are.
That's what Continuum is. So, and we will get more into that, but because we have called this event 100 years with Mondavi growing wine, 2019, where was Mondavi as a family, as wine growers in 1919? How has this 100 years mark been reached?
Well, it was a long time ago, Gwendolyn.
You don't have to go through year by year, I promise.
No, but my grandparents immigrated from Italy to work in the iron ore mines of Minnesota. They went above ground to have a boarding house. And also my grandfather took care of sourcing the wines, my grandmother preparing the meals. It was always about the meals. But all of a sudden, Minnesota, which is where they were, was also the birthplace of prohibition. And prohibition outlawed the formal sale of wine. But even the prohibitioners realized that they could not go against the church. So sacramental wine was allowed. Doctors said wine is healthy and good for you. So, okay, medicinal wine was allowed. And for us, most importantly, the individual use of wine at a family table was recognized as being healthy and good as well. So each head of household was able to prepare 4 barrels worth of wine, 200 gallons a year for their home consumption. And my grandfather said, here I am, I'm going to California and buy grapes. The Paisanis came to him, gave him their cold hard cash. He was a trusted man, and he came to California to buy grapes to allow people to make home wine. And there we were born into this fabulous industry so long ago in very humble ways.
Yeah, and one notable moment, obviously that was the big moment there to start it all, but the other moment in this 100-year history was, of course, the creation of Robert Mondavi Winery in 1966. So maybe you can touch on, and Carissa and you and Brian also, just from further removed from 1966, of why this was momentous for Napa Valley and how it had an impact on the California wine industry.
Well, I think prohibition completely devastated the reputation of wines in California. By 1919, there were 121 wineries in Napa Valley that were recognized internationally as producing fabulous wines. Prohibition destroyed that for a long time, and nothing happened. It was devastated and worse. But my father recognized that the bane of wine, the worst attributes of wine internationally, was off cooperage. And so when he left Charles Krug to start Robert Mondavi Winery, he started from the ground up, wanted to have nothing to do with old cooperage. The microbiological awareness was fairly limited at the time. And so he wanted to start off fresh and brand new. So it wasn't the first new winery. That was in 33, that Louis Martini, which used old techniques. But Robert Mondavi was first because it used 100% stainless steel tanks to get away from the off cooperage, used French oak barrels, new French oak barrels that he had seen in the first growths of Bordeaux. We had German ovals that he would see in the Rheingau and the Mosel. He had the best equipment that money could buy. And so he also got us a little bit closer to the vineyard by calling each of the wines by their varietal name. No Chablis, no Claret, no Burgundy.
Yeah.
None of that. And so but I think the most powerful overriding thing was his belief that it could be done. Everyone knew that if you got into the wine business before that time, you'd go out of business. But my father had the faith that he could make it successful and be recognized among the very best in the world. And so that spirit that led to, and the experience, he had had 30 years of experience at Charles Krug and traveling the world. And that is what led to Robert Mondavi with a great vision and an inspiration really for the industry.
Dad, where were you in 1966?
Oh, in 1966, I was a 15-year-old boy, and I was lucky enough to put the first valves on the first tanks during summer. I worked at Robert Mondavi Winery every summer since its founding, and worked alongside Warren Winiarski, who later left to start Stag's Leap Wine Cellars. Then was Mike Gergich, who I also had the privilege of working with. He then went to Montelena. They both went on to the Judgment of Paris recognition. Zelma Long was there as well for 10 years before she went on to see me. And many of the people that you've had on your
tasting,
like Paul Hobbs, all of those.
They have all
many had come through Robert Mondavi Winery because they wanted to see that spirit, the innovation, and the ability to write our own new book of wine making. The focus really was in the cellar, and there was a spirit of discovery that was powerful. Everyone felt it, and we all learned, and we all came up with great ideas, and ultimately the answer was always, what is best? And I was very lucky because over time I got to make those decisions, and I got to help guide the experimental work and be right there at the very beginning to understand the cause and effect as we knew it. So that was pretty fabulous.
That I think is a very important element. I know my mom, Marcia, always talks about the early days of Robert Mondavi Winery. I think what made it so great in many ways, and what's really continued with us here at Continuum, is this spirit of experimentation. My grandfather went to Europe and kind of knocked on all the doors of the great chateaus, and he just wanted to learn. He would ask very technical questions about how they're farming, why they're farming that way, what equipment they're using. And like Tim said, Robert came back to the US with this laundry list of equipment and techniques that he wanted to try out. So this pursuit of, improvement, of experimentation, is what really was able to elevate Robert Mondavi, was able to elevate American winemaking, and is a spirit that we very much, even in this much smaller scale, still pursue very aggressively.
Robert Mondavi Winery was the 21st winery in Napa Valley in 1966. And after that time, many people said, gosh, if he's not going to go bankrupt, maybe I can do it. Maybe I can make it. And so it spawned an interest, a renaissance in Napa Valley, and really led to the modern era of Napa Valley being recognized among the very finest in the world.
Yeah, it was definitely a game changer. I remember even just getting into wine and taking all my courses. Robert Mondavi is kind of there as the backbone of learning about California wine, and step by step different varieties being planted and wines being introduced and regions, and it was visionary, inspirational. So let's jump back into Continuum. Loved that down memory lane, but yeah, that was an important part of this history, and now we're making more history here. So coming back to Continuum, this wine really represents a sense of place, which is one of my favorite things about wine, is reflecting where it's from. And so tell us a little bit more about these special attributes, the unique qualities of this Continuum site, the vineyard.
And how we got
I think, I think one of the things is, I think like my great grandfather was the one he immigrated here. He was the visionary who brought us to America, brought us to wine, brought us to Napa Valley, and knew that Napa Valley was where the heart of the fine wine industry would be. My grandfather was the one who took that base and sort of elevated it to the stars, knew that we could make wines in the company of the great wines of the world. But his vision was manifold. I think he was very much a cultural ambassador at large for wine as an integral part of a gracious way of living. So it's about wine and food and art. And something that he said was, making good wine is a skill, fine wine and art. And I think that is the part that we carry forward with Continuum. That is what my dad has dedicated his life to, honing the craft of wine on an artistic level. And growing up at my dad's table, I mean, we grew up really appreciating the great wines of the world and the benchmark wines, the wines that, really were setting the standard for what excellence could be in their regions. And so I saw how even within our old organization with the Robert Mondavi Reserve, I would be going out and showing it, and people would be like, oh yeah, no, I could buy this at the grocery store. And I at the time was very young, but I was like very surprised, because I was thinking, this is Tokalon. This is not something you just find on a grocery store shelf. And it's one of the great wines of Napa Valley. And so when we started Continuum, Dad had a very clear vision of something, and I think part of why that was a challenge is because people saw there wasn't just Robert Mondavi Reserve, there was Robert Mondavi Napa Valley, Robert Mondavi Spotlight, there was Robert Mondavi District, there was Robert Mondavi, all down the line. And so it became very confusing what the top end meant. It was basically hurting the goose that laid the golden egg, as Dad would say.
Yes, I think, well, that's a whole separate story, but I think that what we have been able to do with Continuum is to take what brought Robert Mondavi to the forefront, clarity of purpose in its time. And the foundation of Robert Mondavi was predicated upon absolute clarity of focus. You're describing when we went public in '93, then increasingly that clarity was lost. So when everything ended, I was bound and determined to revive that clarity of focus on a site that was outstanding. And I think there are some slides here that show better than I can what this is all about.
Yeah,
so,
and I think that the thing that I want to say though is that my dad did have an absolute clear vision that, the model that you see, the first growth model you see again and again repeated, and that his life experience with the different projects that we had confirmed was, first and foremost, you needed an extraordinary site. Secondly, a dynamic and inspired team committed to the same ultimate goal. And finally, absolute clarity of focus. And so Continuum was born with this clarity to be an estate wine that could be recognized in the company of the great estates in the world.
I think that that idea of clarity of focus is something that resonates with so many of us, because in this busy world, we go from one task to another to another. We rarely have the opportunity of having a deep dive into any topic. And so I was determined to make sure that we could do that here. And here, this is to talk about sight. This slide, perhaps this and a few others, tell that story. This slide to explain what you see. The foreground are our vines right in front of our Continuum Estate House, and adjacent to us here. It's just there. But what you're looking at is down into the valley. You're looking across the city of Napa, down to Carneros, onto the San Francisco Bay. And then across that, you can see where the cursor is going right now. Those are buildings in San Francisco. So you can begin to have a great sense of space here. We are just north of San Francisco. Obviously, the bay is on the Pacific Ocean. The fog comes in and you can feel it. You can feel the breezes. And you are reminded what Mark Twain once said, that the coldest winter he ever spent was a summer in San Francisco. Well, here we are. San Francisco is at our doorstep. You can feel the fog coming in, keeping the vines healthy and clean at elevation. The next slide will show us give you a better sense of how high we are. What you see here is, this is from our Continuum estate looking west, and we are overlooking the fog that is down in the valley below.
And the Mayacamas above.
And then the Mayacamas range is beyond. So we are Oakville with altitude. Some of the vineyards you see there are effectively just above Harlanville. I say that because Bill Harlan also believes that vineyards on hills can do extremely well, well-drained sites, but we are just opposite that above Oakville. So if you are in the arch of Robert Mondavi Winery, you look east through the crown of Opus One, you look up above on the Vaca Range, up above our good friend and neighbor, Nauca della Valle, go straight above that. That is where we are. So we have westerly exposures to the Mayacamas Range, as shown here, southerly exposures to the San Francisco Bay, and you can also see this red, rocky, volcanic soil with these huge andesite boulders that are witnesses to that we are on a volcanic site. California, 2/3 of the length of California was under the ocean. Tectonic plates shifted up, and Napa Valley was formed by two crumple zones. The Mayacamas Range took those marine layers and crumpled it in a way that exposes different slices of that marine layer with an occasional volcanic outcropping. Then there's a valley floor below with the alluvial fans that emanate. Tocolon is primarily from the western hills, but on the eastern side, it's mostly from volcanic. But here on the hills of the Vaca Range, it is dominantly volcanic material. So what that means is that it's high in minerality, low in fertility, and as a result, the vines, well, even the shrubbery manifests that. So there's scrub oak, manzanita, and smaller vines. On the other side of the valley, here we have the manzanita. Here you see the wild sage.
So
and
drought
scrub
tolerant,
oak.
arid climate kind of, yeah.
So this is the witness of why our vines are smaller, why they are filled with this. This is wild sage that is everywhere up here. And it's the reason we have called our vineyards Sage Mountain Vineyards. Sage because as an indication of the biodiversity that is here, that is natural. We are tucked into the hillside. And mountain because we're well off the valley floor, and the soil is volcanic, and it causes the vines to struggle. And we all know that vines that are limited naturally produce wines of concentration, here with minerality, perfume, and anyway, it's a great site.
But I think that was quite visionary and extraordinary of my dad, because in the wake of the sale of Robert Mondavi Company, you know, we were all very eager to be able to have our roots back in the soil. And my grandfather was still alive, and he was like, I don't have a vine to my name. What's the next step? What are we doing? And pushing to try to see that we could, you know, carry on. But Dad waited and was patient until he found the site.
I didn't wait. I looked. It was hard to find.
Engaged,
looking and finding are different things.
Engaged, searching, but he was patient in that he didn't settle for anything less than something that he believed could elevate our family legacy in wine to the next level. And so this
really have to do with, so these are great stories. I mean, the stories you've told of just continuing the legacy and the vision, is that where the name Continuum comes from?
The name actually speaks, to the fact that we haven't missed a harvest since 1919.
Yeah. Okay.
But obviously the 2019 Continuum is only Continuum's 15th vintage.
Right.
So with every generation, we've had to reinvent ourselves, but sometimes it's been a forward active motion. Sometimes it has felt like a step back.
We are looking forward to knocking heads together, not apart.
There you go. Isn't that lovely?
But Continuum is a great name for us because we want to carry on with the best of what our family stood for.
Yep.
Not everything, only the best.
The best, yes. But there's been multiple little stories you've told that I feel like we're talking about that continuation. And so it's just, it kind of ties it back in. So
that it's been, you know, it hasn't been necessarily the smoothest path, but we did start in wine, like Tim said, from these humble beginnings of shipping grapes with my great grandfather, and then to kind of making bulk wine as soon as prohibition was repealed. We moved to table wine, Charles Krug, and kind of elevated the art of winemaking at Robert Mondavi Winery. And now, as we started this presentation with, our aspiration is to create this winery in the model of the first gross. So this for us is the pinnacle of our journey, hopefully to continue on upward.
Yes, and hopefully we've learned some things so we can actually, we feel that Dad and my Aunt Marcia are doing it in such a way that we're conservative, we're being careful, and that's why focused, long-term vision, and not taking on partners, not taking on too much, that doing things that allow us to remain in control despite the weather, so to speak.
I like to think that we have set ourselves up for success. Here we have this gorgeous setting. It is 173 acres of land, westerly and southerly exposures. There are some northern. I love the complexity of this site. You can see the winery here. We are the highest winery on Pritchard Hill, highest average elevation vineyard, with complexity and an ability to focus on the 44 blocks that we have. And each of them, we know backwards and forwards, each of them, we have the same team that focuses on them year after year after year. And that's the power of being 100% grown, produced, and bottled by us with our own team. We are an unusually rare family that has come from wine, that are still focused on wine at the very highest level. Now, we're smaller than anything we have ever been before by design, because we believe that clarity of focus and being able to look at every detail many times and to be able to come up with something that gives us feedback to the care of the vine, care of the foliage, care of the leafing, care of the cropping, care of the harvesting, care of the vinification. There are so many variables that by being able to be set up as we are, we can look at the details and ultimately have it in the glass, which is what it is all about.
And speaking of this glass, let's talk about what's in the glass. Hopefully everybody's been kind of enjoying on their own, like had a few sips myself, but I'd love to taste through it and kind of maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the aromas, the flavors, the structure, all that good tasting note stuff, but also kind of walk us through how it takes us back to everything you were talking about in the vineyard. And then we can maybe talk a little bit about what you're doing in the winery to really bring that out.
I think first and foremost, like a hallmark of my dad's, my dad's hand in the wine is that it's incredibly texturally driven, very silky, supple. This is very young, but it's already so approachable and so delicious and enjoyable now. And yet you can see it has the tension and all the components that will allow it to continue to unfold and reveal more with time. And this site. And so I think this site gives us like this gorgeous ferrous minerality that is so special. I mean, to have minerality be sort of expressed with the beautiful forward fruit expression and structure of Cabernet, to have it be on the same par is like, that's so unique and specific to this area and the low yields that we get, but also the savory component that this site gives us, being surrounded by this native vegetation that Dad was talking about, and the sage and bay laurel. You smell it in the heat of the growing season, and the vines really smell it too. So you're getting these beautiful savory notes as a part of the complexity as well.
So our estate model is, we have 70 acres planted to vine up here. It's all on one contiguous property, and Continuum is made up of 4 varietals. So all of our wines are, or I should say every vintage of Continuum is a blend. And because we're estate based, the yields can be a little bit different every year. Wine is after all grown. So the 2019 is 50% Cabernet, 37% Cab Franc, 7 Petit Verdot, and 6% Merlot. So it's a very special blend. Our plantings on the property are representative of the varietals that we feel grow best in these conditions. It's a low vigor area. That's the reason why we're here. The vines struggle in this very shallow, rocky, volcanic soil. So we're getting extremely low yields from our vines. Carissa mentioned that we have smaller vines as well. So what you get with Continuum is, we're getting a fraction of the yields that producers on the valley floor get. So you can taste in the wine, you can feel in the texture, the density of flavor, the concentration of flavor, and the layers. And what's unique about Continuum, something I think is a strength in being a blend, is between these 4 varietals, we can compose a full experience on the palate that can surpass any individual block or lot. We can target a very beautiful, elegant beginning, a very interesting, multi-dimensional mid-palate, and a really long-lasting, beautiful finish. Something that you can't do with just 100% cab from one vineyard or so.
We're also very lucky to have been able to find this site that was in the hands of people that loved it before us. And it was first planted in 91. The majority of our vineyard is planted in 96. There are younger plantings in 2010 and more recent, but the average age of the vines here is about 20 years old. And I do believe that vines, wines, and people have a lot in common. The good get better with time. And you can see it. As a wine grower, I am absolutely committed to that. And I've seen it time after time. So there are layers, there's nuance, there's complexity, there's finesse, and there's elegance.
But this site also gives us a lot of intensity and focus, and that lift that comes from the volcanic soils, that textural component and vibrancy from the volcanic soils that we have, that is so special, such a beautiful aspect of this wine.
And something that we all love with Tim's winemaking, our family got into wine in the first place because, good Italians, we believe wine should be at the dinner table. Tim's always made wines that were really beautifully elegant, wines that pair really beautifully with a meal, that kind of work hand in hand with a meal, enhance a meal, and are enhanced by a meal. And, we have all this strength in these robust mountain tannins on this site, but you can see behind us, we have these French oak fermentation tanks. We also have concrete fermenters. And both of those
No
are,
stainless steel, ironically,
Yeah,
no
got
stainless
it.
steel.
as it turns out. But both of those fermentation vessels are designed so that, you know, we can really focus on the texture of the tannins. So, you know, you'll notice that, yes, this is a big, powerful, dimensional Napa mountain cab, but it has a really beautifully elegant, light touch to it. The texture of the tannins is very supple, doesn't kind of punch you in the jaw like you might expect. And that's thanks in part to these tanks that are around us. And Tim can talk more about the techniques we use to really smooth out, to soften that profile so that the mountain fruit, which is just so beautiful, really shines through in the glass. Something else that we've done is, you know, when we were on the valley floor, the tradition was you get your To Kalon fruit and you add in 100% new French oak. And that's kind of the recipe for success. And every year that we've been, every year that we've been at Continuum Estate and on Sage Mountain Vineyard, we've scaled down the percentage of new French oak that we use because, you know, first of all, we have such strong, amazingly developed tannins from the fruit. We don't need to supplement any with that oak tannin. And second, every time you taste oak on the palate, you're almost disappointed that it's covering up this really beautiful, expressive, elegant, dimensional fruit character. So we've scaled back year after year. I believe we're about, what, 65% new French oak at this point. And we're continuing to go down. And the balance of that is kind of once or twice used French oak.
And are you using barriques or antlers behind you?
Well,
Okay.
for fermentation, we use the oak fermenters and the concrete fermenters that you can see here as well. And there are slides also that show both, perhaps a little bit better. But the as Brian mentioned, you know, we have used stainless steel, we've used oak, we've used concrete. Each has an impact on the wine. Stainless steel was a major step forward from flawed cooperage from post-prohibition times, prior to the time when people didn't understand sanitation to the extent or microbiology to the extent that is necessary, nor did they have the money to spend on that. You know, everything you do costs. And so, but now we have a room that is set up for success. It is humidified, it's temperature controlled, it is clean, and within it we have these oak fermenters that give, allow the tannins to be a little bit more subtle, a little bit more elegant. Concrete allows more minerality to be retained. Stainless is terrific, but it retains more youthfulness, which for young Cabernet tannin, I'm not all that enamored of. I would like to see it more sophisticated, more evolved, more developed. And that's not to say you can't have great wine made in stainless steel. There's lots of them around. But a personal preference is that there's just a little bit better sophistication, elegance, tenderness in both oak and in concrete for my palate for this fruit. And that's why we have them.
And I think something that's unique too in our barrel aging that I think draws from Dad's expansive repertoire of experience. You know, in so many regions in the world, they're focusing on a single varietal like Chardonnay or Pinot Noir or Riesling or Cabernet family varietals. And as a result of, you know, all the experiments and research that we were doing at Robert Mondavi Winery that Dad was overseeing, Dad has this broad palette to draw from. And so in terms of barrel aging, so we're unfined and unfiltered. And in barrel aging, you know, in Bordeaux, classically, they would rack it every month, every 2 months after.
No, every 3 months. So 4 times a year would be normal. You would find then 45 days thereafter. So anyway, but it would normally have 6 to 8 rackings during the course of the wine's life. But here
we rack sparingly,
and
once or twice in the wine's life. Keep it on the lees.
Our vinification is more Bordelaise, but our aging is more Burgundian. So I'm a big believer in the benefits of yeast and the autolysis that takes place in barrel. And I've seen it time and time again. Champagne, the best are kept sur lie. Muscadet sur lie is a higher category of Muscadet. It ages better. You see it in whites, you see it in reds, but there is more.
White Burgundies are some of my favorites. Are just
absolutely, absolutely. They are dependent upon the suppleness and the silkiness that the yeast will give then back to the wine. And so everything we are doing is taking fruit that is has a minerality intrinsic to it, the concentration by virtue of the low vigor of the vines and a low yield. And we translate that with tenderness in the fermenters, long maceration, 20 to 40 day maceration, depending upon variety, depending upon individual block, depending upon individual year. So all of those things, and we are involved with all of that, of course, but then allow the wine to then be nurtured in barrel with the lees to be able to give that silky sheen that is there and maintain the vibrancy and the polish and the finesse that is a hallmark of a great wine in my view. So that's this wine.
That's what you have. And you know, a great wine has this integration where nothing sticks out. You can't tell there's oak. You can't tell that tannins are overpowering. And so nothing is overpowering in this wine. Everything is just this kind of seamless harmony that comes through. And the other thing I noticed of everything you're talking about, I'm seeing human traits from every age of humans. We're talking about nurturing, like with babies. We're talking about adults. And we're talking, it's just,
sure.
it's and art. We also, you know, talk about silky and the texture and, you know, it's just, it is kind of a piece of art. And
there is something magical about wine, about wine and the highest level. And there is a reason why it appears in poetry and music and in the Bible and in the Torah. You know, there is something that is there's a through line that touches people's soul. And so isn't it fabulous that we are all in the wine business, that we love the wine business and we get to pursue it at the very highest level. So that's the fun of it.
yeah.
Something that we haven't even touched on actually is that we do farm totally organically, and the dedicated team in the vineyards, they're involved in the tastings of the individual lots that we have. And so we're constantly looking at each, you know, after vinification, we have 60, 70 wine lots that are all being cared for and evaluated throughout the first year.
I was going to ask, like, when you blend, so maybe you can pull that into this also.
Always.
Yeah, always blending in my brain.
Well, yeah, because we do know now the individual blocks. We know through experience with them. That's the power of an estate operation. The same people in the vineyard, in the cellar, throughout, and that we are all tied together to pursue this excellence. And so it is wonderful to be able to have that harmonic focus.
I mean, everything about this is like my dad, this artistic winemaker's dream. And so having this dedicated team, having them, the tasting, the focus on the lots is like a very disciplined every 2 weeks from like 9 in the morning until they break for lunch, which is sometimes 2 in the afternoon, and they're hungry. And
but that's the
very
point.
Focused.
It is not just me. Yeah. Yes, I lead it. This is a dream come true for me, but also we have been able to attract really talented people, and they tend to stay with us. And so we have a high level of longevity. Our general manager I've worked with for about 35 years. The guys in the cellar started working in the vineyards. A couple started working with us in 1981 at Robert Mondavi. We've had our first, a mother and daughter duo that have worked with us. People are central to anything, and nothing great ever happens alone, nothing. But we have a shared vision that, yes, I had the luck to be able to be in the right place at the right time and attract the right team that are equally motivated to tell the story, to realize it in the vineyard, to realize it in the cellar, and to keep doing it. You know, we love what we're doing so much. We want to do it again next year.
Wine is about people, about a team. Okay, go ahead.
Really, to that point on blending, what is pretty incredible about the blending process is it is, you know, we have a good group of people who participate in blending, and it is miraculously democratic. And the reality of wine.
I mean, well, Dad calls the shots ultimately.
It's not Mondavi-cratic. It's not Mondavi-cratic. Okay.
No, I was impressed. I was a little bit surprised, and I'm very proud of our blending session. But you know, what's important to remember is wine. You know, it's a subjective experience. Everyone has a different palate. Everyone has different preferences and sensitivities. So what's really amazing in our blending sessions is, you know, we have people of different age ranges. We have both men and women who are tasting, and that makes a difference because
In the vineyards, in the cellar, in administration, and you know, you can find great palates in a lot of places. And one thing I will say is I think people intrinsically have good palates. They don't trust their own palates, and people deserve to trust their own palate and to think about it, what they smell, think about what they taste. But we are a very visual society. We put too much emphasis on what we see and not as much emphasis on what we smell or what we taste. But people should trust their own palates even more.
And you know what? One reason for that is our memory is more linked to our senses of smell and taste.
Yes.
And even
Yes.
sometimes hearing, much less with our sight. So
Yeah.
yeah.
But you know, men and women taste a little bit differently. People, older and younger people, taste a little bit differently. You know,
Everybody
kids
tastes
always hate arugula, anything bitter.
I know,
younger people are more sensitive to bitterness.
I've taught things of saying, you know, why do men often drink their coffee black, but women prefer, not always, but you know, it's different. And even as you get older, or if you're younger, and the pickiness of a young person, and it's all evolving, changing, different. So quality, however, you've got nailed. Well done. I'm really glad I only opened a half bottle because
It's too delicious.
Well, there's a full one behind you.
I know that, but I'm not opening it tonight. But,
delicious wines are dangerously drinkable. So
exactly. So let's keep going. Let's talk a little bit about the label, because that's also, I feel like that just is such it's a piece of art, just like the wine.
Actually, my sister Chiara is the artist who did the artwork that is our label. It's a Cabernet Franc vine that was 25 years old when she captured it. The original piece is 12 feet wide and 6 feet tall, and it's here at the winery. But it really, for us, she captured it by literally building this canvas, bringing it in the vineyards, propping it up behind the vine, and capturing it as the vine is dancing on the canvas at sunset. And then when she
brothering it up,
filled in she did the silhouette, brought it in her studio, filled it in with this gold acrylic paint, and she wanted something that would have a genuine interaction with light, symbolizing the vine's interaction with the sun, which is what go for it.
No, you say it.
No, Dad. You say it.
Well, no, Carissa brought to us the point that Galileo said that wine is light held together by water. Isn't that the same?
Wine is sunlight held together
So
by
this,
water.
the piece that we have is Light of the Vine, is the name of the piece. So it's a beautiful piece, and I'm very proud of my daughter for doing it. I'm proud of all of my family and of our extended team, because everybody has shared the vision and participated in it by putting in their heart and soul, as my father used to say. Yeah. So everybody's all in.
All in. Well, this is a beautiful wine. Obviously, it's gorgeous. I think I wanted to kind of finish off with just, Tim, I love that also you wanted to be introduced as wine growers, third generation, fourth generation. But Carissa and Brian, as fourth generation, maybe you could touch a little bit on your generation, the commitment of continuing your legacy as a family, but also working with this ever-changing climate and that continues to rapidly change and affect wine growing. So just a couple things maybe on the future plans for that.
I think, as wine growers, we've always been sensitive to the cues of Mother Nature, and we've always, I think, wanted to be reverential in our care for this beautiful site that we have, and that extends to how we live our lives. But of course, we do feel the impact of climate change, and so we are, I mean, I think our team is poised to be doing everything we can. We have so much focus and attention that goes into soil health and preserving and protecting the microbiome of our soil. Between the cover crops that we're using, we were no-till for 10 years, and now because of our site, we realize actually and the drought that we have, the soil's become compacted. So we've started tilling every other vine row judiciously every 3 years or so.
In order to receive the rain that is there.
Yeah, and so, I mean, a lot of attention on soil health. There's a lot of focus that we have on site in terms of our water usage as well. This winery we have a water capturing system, and the water that we use within the cellar, so 154,000 gallon cave that we've dug, and all the water needs we have for the cellar come from rain. And the water that we use in the cellar is able to be diverted back out into the reservoir and used for the vineyards. And within the cellar as well, we have we plumbed through the cellar as a CO2 capturing system. So we are in the early, that was something that Professor Roger Bolton suggested we should be using. And it was ahead of its time in 2013 when we built the winery. And he said, you know, the technologies will come along and people will be able to retrieve it. And so far, we're just now finally in the experimental phase of actually retrieving the CO2, because so far it's been an efficiency in that we pump it back out rather than having to continually push it out of our cellar and rehumidify and re-temperature control. So that has been a fuel savings, but I think actually being able to, so being a farmers, we're already carbon neutral, but being able to be carbon negative is, I think, something we are actively wanting to do. But I think we are extending our, like, how we're looking at things beyond the vineyards now, and looking at like the other facets of our business that we can be trying to be lighter, have a lighter footprint as well.
Some of the things I used to think of global warming and say, oh, it's ill-timed rain, either too little or too much. And I wasn't too worried about that because those problems exist in other areas and you can get through. But it's not just that. It's ill-timed cold during flowering because of the drought we have had with the 15 harvest, or the 15 vintage started much earlier in the season. And then we got through the stage we are in right now of just bud break up to flowering, but flowering, there was a cold snap, half a crop. So in 16, a recollection of that, only 20% off. But the biggest problem we began to see more directly with the 2017 vintage. 2/3 of our harvest was in, and then winds on October 9th brought trees down into power lines and caused 17 fires throughout Napa and Sonoma. And so we were not able to use a single drop from that. So I think that fire and smoke taint has risen to the highest level of our concerns with global warming, but we are taking steps to mitigate against that with fire breaks that we were carved with the harvest of 20 or during the fires of 20. We have a strong community outreach program with our neighbors and throughout the county and throughout the state, really, to mitigate against the possibility of fire. We bring goats in to deal with the vegetation, so the understory of the open spaces is naturally reduced. So we're taking a lot of steps of that type, but fundamentally, the other good side of being where we are on the side of this hill is that our temperatures are naturally moderated. We are not as cold as a valley floor, nor is we as hot as the valley floor. So there is a natural benefit to being on the side of the hill from a temperature perspective. But global warming is real. I don't think anybody questions that any longer. But the biggest element of it that causes us concern is fire and smoke. And we're dealing with our community to mitigate against the possibility of that. But there's no way that we'll be able to protect against lightning strikes. However, with fire breaks and with understory grass removal, things of that nature, we'll be able to tilt things as much as possible into our favor. So, but I think that's something that more people need to understand and more people need to get on board. But wine is a very important witness that should elevate everyone's ideas about the fragility of nature and about the importance of our environment, and pull on this right end of the rope to ensure that we get to enjoy what we're doing with each meal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very clear, as Tim kind of said, you can look at the weather year over year and say, it was a good year, it's a bad year, it's a good year, it's a bad year. But, if you, again, want to know if global warming is real, ask a farmer. Because, we can very clearly see, as Tim just said, wine is a record of weather over time. And we've seen in broad strokes the large direction of temperatures and of weather systems. The wind Tim mentions, that has shifted from a different part of the region down into Napa. So the shifts in the temperatures on broad strokes push weather systems around and create havoc, and we've seen it very, very clearly. And we're lucky, as Tim said, that we're in this band where we're a little bit more moderate, between the temperature swings of the day. But what's really important for us is we have a generational, time scale that we're working in for our property and for our environment. So we're not just trying to, make as much wine as we can in the years that we have. We're trying to set our property up, and ideally our state and our world up to be more, in keeping with what's sustainable and will help ultimately weather patterns for the next, 3-5 generations, maybe more than that.
Whatever, why not say it? Go ahead, just live large forever.
Yeah.
So, there have been these trends of, there's organic farming, there's biodynamic farming that I think rightly so are in the forefront of people's minds now. But, especially with Tim's incredible breadth of experience, we've seen farming techniques come and go, these different dogmas of farming techniques. And what we've been able to do with all this experimentation that we've had over the years is take the best elements of all of these trends that come and go, and we can kind of put to practice on this one small little bit of land all the best practices to make sure that the soil health is increasingly healthy, to make sure that we're in harmony with the biodiversity of the property, with all the native vegetation and plants and animals around us. And it's a long-term effort where, it's not just for marketing, it's not just for yields, it's for the long-term health of the property and for our planet.
I mean, ultimately, Continuum has gone back to the old world model where we're entirely focused and entirely dedicated to every nuance of this really extraordinary site. And we every year we know more, and we're in a better position to honor it. And that's what this is all about.
So you will be continuing Continuum. We're going to go on a continuous path to continue the progress and
forever.
The quality forever.
In perpetuity, no, in per continuum.
Well, this is one of my favorite wines. I feel so privileged and honored to be able to taste it with you, with all the stories behind it, and enjoy it, and drink it, and taste it. So thank you so much for your time and stories and history. And I'm excited to see many more vintages of Continuum coming around. So
Well, thank you for
Thank you
helping
so
us get
much.
our
Thank
story
you.
out. We're very
Yes,
proud
thank
of
you
what we
very
have
much.
and appreciate our partnership in this. So
Yeah.
thank you very much,
absolutely.
Gwendolyn.
Cheers.
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 Thank you very much.
It's both a science and a form of high art. It's made from the combination of grapes, sunlight, rain, soil, and time. It's raised up in the moments that matter. It's wine. And we are Wine.com. We have the largest wine selection in the world, online sommeliers with free advice, and now our powerful new app puts the entire world of wine in your hands. Wine.com. Seriously passionate about wine. Download our free app today.